After looking at all of the factors that led to industrial development in the United States in the late 1800s, we begin to see very big businesses develop. Like we said already, this would not have happened if there had not been all of those factors in place in order to allow these big businesses to develop. Limited liability, meaning that you could invest just a small amount of money in a various corporation rather than having to put up all of the amount it required to get a business off the ground. This was going to be key in order to allow your ordinary Americans to try to invest without having to put everything they had on the line. So the public does begin investing in various corporations. We also have mass market selling, where we are selling now to large amounts of people rather than just our small communities that are around us. We now have the capability of selling our products to a wide variety of people all over our country and in other places as well. The advantages of this are going to be greater efficiency. We can make better products at a faster rate. This is going to lead to just an overall better product at a better price for the consumer. So for consumers, this is going to drive the price down. We begin putting managers in place whose job it is to simply keep an eye on the operations of the factory instead of the owner of that factory having to be in charge of all of that as well. We also begin conducting productivity studies, meaning we would bring someone in and we're going to apply scientific method to the operations of a factory. They would come in, they would time how long it took for a particular assembly line to work, how long it took a particular individual to perform a task, and then they would evaluate how effective that was. While this particular form of productivity study could be very beneficial for the factory itself, it often cost many workers their jobs, in that if they could find a way to cut out a worker, that would save the company that worker's salary or pay. So this is going to bring a lot of ill feelings towards the management in order to make a better profit or a higher profit. The disadvantages were many. Very unfair competition practices, things like putting their prices at rock bottom to drive another competitor out of business, and then being able to create a monopoly which could then set their prices wherever they wanted. They had so much money, they were also very corrupt and able to bribe very many public officials, our government officials, senators, congressmen. And they also had so much power, and there was such a huge labor force that they could totally destroy labor union movements by simply firing all of those workers who were a part of that movement and then bringing in brand new labor. The public had very mixed feelings about these big businesses and businessmen. First of all was this idea or theory called social Darwinism. Social Darwinism was based on the scientific theory of Darwin's theory of evolution. It was based on the idea that only the best would survive, or survival of the fittest. And they just turned around and applied this to the business world, saying that only the best businesses and businessmen would survive, rise to the top, and then get rich. So basically, they shouldn't be blamed for their success. They should be patted on the back for it because that was just the nature of things. It was also a way to justify their wealth and to prove that they indeed deserved that amount of wealth because they were just better fit for it. The Gospel of Wealth was something written by Andrew Carnegie and talked about how those who had been given that wealth or who had earned all of that wealth, that it was a God-given right and that they should then use it to better their society. Many Americans really liked these rags to riches stories. Andrew Carnegie was one of those true rags to riches individuals who really started at nothing and worked his way up to the top. And we see those stories over and over again in those dime novels written by Horatio Alger. There are many types of big businesses. First of all is a monopoly. A monopoly is created when a business controls all or most of the supply of a product. If a person owned every shoe store in town, they could then set the price on those shoes they wanted to sell because there would be no competition. So monopolies are generally bad for consumers. A trust is a type of monopoly. This is where several businesses act as one under the control of a board of directors so that they are able to again set prices. A merger is when two or more businesses join to become one larger business. We see this today often with things like banks or cell phone companies, where again they join to become one larger business, forming a sort of monopoly. While this was legal at this point in time in the late 1800s, it is no longer legal today. And when businesses merge, they have to go through a various sorts of laws in order to prevent a monopoly being formed. A holding company is where you have a business just to control another business as a parent company, but we're not going to spend much time talking about that. There are two ways of forming a monopoly. The first is horizontal integration. This is where you form a monopoly by controlling all of the same type of business, as you see in this diagram to the right. So if you think about it, and you'll want to write down, horizontal integration is where you control your competition, or you buy out your competition. So again, going back to that shoe store analogy, if you own a shoe store, you're going to buy out every other shoe store in town. Next is vertical integration. This is forming a monopoly when you control all of the businesses related to your primary business. As in this diagram to the right, you are going to buy out everything that it takes to make your product, including transportation methods. So in this case, back to the shoe store analogy, you're going to buy out everything it takes to make your shoes. Leather, the trucking company, everything. That way you can control those prices and again form that monopoly. These businessmen, or what we call robber barons, are going to make such extreme profits that many Americans begin to protest very loudly and really dislike all of these robber barons. So many of them begin practicing something called philanthropy. This is where they're going to donate very large sums of money to charity. Now, there were different motives for doing this. Some of people argued that they only did it to better their image, while others argued that it didn't matter why they donated large sums of money to charities as long as that money was going for a good cause. Men like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller donated tremendous amounts of wealth. In fact, Andrew Carnegie is known for the amount of money he donated. As time went on, these big businesses and their practices were exposed. And the public gets tired of all of these extreme wealth, which they believed was made on the backs of their people, of the workers, paying them very little. Finally, in 1890, the federal government takes a step in trying to ban monopolies with the Sherman Antitrust Act. While this is a very weak law that doesn't really define what a trust is, it is going to set a precedent or example for future regulation of these big businesses. So this law, even though it was very weak, it is going to allow future lawmakers to say, we have something to stand on to be able to make a stronger law against big businesses and monopolies, which would in turn hopefully protect consumers.